There have been 62 shootings in Boston since the marathon bombings of April 15th, a statistic being tracked by the Bay State Banner as a way of pointing out there is another form of terror that is a constant presence in Boston. Many of the victims are young, and so are the perpetrators. It's an issue especially dear to Judge Leslie Harris, who just received a Robert F. Kennedy Legacy Award for his work with juvenile offenders. Each week at the Suffolk County Juvenile Court, Judge Leslie Harris comes face to face with young people who've landed in trouble and in danger of failing school. They remind him of a path he almost took. Bored with high school, Harris decided it wasn't worth staying around for his June graduation. But a school administrator said he'd come looking for Harris if he didn't show up the next day. That's all it took to keep him on track. And today, that second chance is something Harris tries to provide the kids he sees in court. Instead of traditional lockup, Harris refers them to the Detention Diversion Advocacy Project, which allows juvenile offenders to continue with school under strict supervision. It costs taxpayers a fraction of the cost of juvenile detention. But for Harris, it's mostly about showing kids the other path. And Judge Leslie Harris is here. Welcome, Judge.
Thank you.
And this is a beautiful and very cool award. How did that come about? How did you get that?
Well, I've been working with DDAP and the Robert F. Kennedy Foundation for a while. They have provided us an opportunity to reduce the number of children we keep in lockup out of Dorchester Court. And this is sort of, I guess, a recognition of my working with them. And of course, it's named after Robert F. Kennedy. So for someone from my generation, I'm a child of the 60s. I became a young adult, and I was strongly influenced by what was going on in the 60s. So the Kennedys, both John and Robert, were a major part of my life, along with Martin Luther King and Malcolm and those folks who were out front and ultimately gave their lives for people like me.
Well, just explain how this program works. I mean, these kids come into court. I mean, and you've had some tough cases. Sometimes you've gotten personally involved with some of these kids, but you see some kid come in, he's 17 years old. You know, how does it work?
Not 17 yet.
16, 17, yes. 16. 17, they're already 17. In the adult, and I know you want to change that too, but what happens to these
What happens is these are children who generally have never been on probation, which are the majority of the kids we have. They are low-level offenders, but you can see that it's getting ready to be a repeat issue because they're having either conflicts at school or at home or in the community. And with DDAP, they don't work just with the child. They work with the family to address those issues which are surrounding the child. So what they're trying to do is to not just change the child, but change the situation that the child is in. And they get the kids involved in community events. They take them places they've never been to, plays and the musicals and to sporting events. And a lot of these children never get out.
But it's mandatory.
Well, we give them credit, sort of. We have to work with the DAs on this. And these are children who the DAs are looking for something different also. This is before they're placed on probation, before they're convicted of anything. So we try to do this as an alternative to having them convicted.
And how do you measure success?
By them not coming back to my court. One of the things I tell them very clearly is I don't want them back in my court unless they're coming there to work. I would love to have them come back as a lawyer, social worker, probation officer, but I don't want them back in court standing in front of a judge again. And we see very few of them coming back.
Oh, do some of them go to the adult court, though?
No, because, see, if you don't mess up within a couple of years after you've been in court, the chances are you're not going back to court. When I was a probation officer, that's one of the things we were trained, that any probation longer than 2 or 3 years, you might as well lock them up now because that's a long time to try to comply with orders.
So one of the things you're really adamant about, you think that the state should change the legal age of juveniles to 18 instead of 17, at least.
Yes. So I believe we should have a 3-tier justice system. Juveniles until they're 18, 19, young adults until they're 30, and then adults. And the focus on both juveniles and young adults should be education. The mandatory finishing of high school. I went up to Norfolk Prison. I'm going up this Sunday, in fact. And when you sit and talk with these men, you understand very quickly that the majority of them did not finish high school. And to me, there's a direct link between lack of education and ending up in prison. And we want to break that link. We want to keep our kids in school until they finish. When I was growing up, all you needed was a high school education to get a job that you could work and retire from. That's not true today.
You know, it's interesting you talk about the 3 tiers, because last year when I was doing an analysis of all the murders in Boston and where they took place, one thing kept jumping off the page at me, and it was the average, actually it was more than the average, it was the preponderant number of people who were murdered or had committed the murder were 22.
Yes.
So they're already past their legal drinking age or everything, but they're really, really young 20s. 22. Everybody was 22.
And what I remember so clearly is working with men in the community who were now older, who got past those 20s, but now they're trying to be respectful members of the community and work and raise a family, but they can't get jobs because their quarries keep them from. One guy that I worked with lived on my block, hadn't been in trouble in over 20 years.
And he still had a record.
He still had a record. He'd get the job. They loved him, but when they did the background check, they had to let him go. And what people don't understand is even juvenile records follow you for the rest of your life. In Massachusetts, juvenile records are not closed. People think, oh, it's juvenile, it doesn't matter. But when you go for a job application and you sign that waiver so they can get your record, they get your juvenile record also. And it can come back to haunt you.
Absolutely. You know, looking at that statistic that the Bay State Banner has been tracking, I mean, it's true in a way. They're making a big point of that to say that this is going on every day in our lives. Not that not comparable to the bombings. That was a totally different kind of thing. But it's just day in and day out. Today, you picked up the newspaper and 5 shootings over the weekend, at least 2 dead, I believe. It's just over and over and over.
And when you live in that community, I live in Roxbury, and I raised my children there. And the fear that a parent has every day when they let their child leave their home. I know my boys. They were decent young men. My daughter, decent young lady. I did not worry about what they would do. I was more worried about what they would walk into or what someone would do to them. And that's a frightening thing for people to live with every day. I believe there should be an urban stress section of medicine, to treat urban stress, what these children go through every day, afraid to leave their home to go to school, afraid to be in school, afraid to come home from school. And we should look at that. We should find ways to address this.
I'm sure you saw the Reverend Eugene Rivers' op-ed last week in the Boston Herald. I guess it was a column about girls and how the judgment, and that we have to rescue our girls because these girls are going along. They're getting swept up, and they're becoming accomplices. And more young girls, women, are finding themselves in jail or in trouble.
Not just accomplices. They're now taking the lead.
Yes, because people aren't suspecting them.
Yeah. Well, not just that. I think that girls are tired of being victims. And some of these young ladies have said, I'm not going to be the victim. If I'm going to be involved, I'm going to be the perpetrator. And they have their little groups, and they travel together because they have protection when they're together. And groups always have its own dynamic, and sometimes they are the ones hurting the community.
Are you seeing more girls coming into your court?
We have seen fewer young people in general coming into court. The numbers have dropped dramatically from what they were in the early 2000s and late 1990s and all. The numbers are way down compared to what they were. We see more kids committing stupid, and I don't use that term lightly, but stupid
like
things.
What?
Snatching phones. I hate the phones. I just saw that the attorney generals from a couple of states went to the phone companies to try to get them to make kill switches. Such a simple thing to do. My phone is useless to someone else because it doesn't have a SIM card. So if I turn it off, you steal it. I just call them and turn it off.
Right. Well, we can all do that.
Yeah, and then it can't be used anymore. But with these phones, all you do is put a new SIM card in it and you have a phone, because it can't be locked. And the phone companies know that, and they should have done this a long time ago.
All right. Well, Judge Leslie Harris, pleasure to have you here, and congratulations again on your Embracing the Legacy Award, RFK Embracing the Legacy. That's quite cool. As a child of the 60s, I appreciate that myself.